There is a kind of woman the world does not know how to hold. Not because she is small, not because she is weak, not because she lacks the sharpness or the fire or the spine to demand a room's attention, but because she walks through every door exactly as she is, unhurried, undemanding, carrying her worth like a quiet flame instead of a roaring fire, and the world, trained since birth to follow the loudest sound and the brightest flash, simply moves past her, the way the eye moves past the stone pillars that have held the great hall upright for 100 years. Present, essential, entirely unseen, the wolf world is built on instinct, on the ability to sense things that ordinary creatures miss. Dominance and threat, and the precise weight of another wolf's power before a single word has been spoken. Wolves pride themselves on this. They call it nature, they call it truth. They believe their instincts do not lie, and yet, even wolves can learn not to see what is always there. This is the story of one such woman. Her name was Catalina Moonshadow. She was an Omega of the Nightfang pack. No rank that turned heads, no bloodline that opened doors, no history of challenge or conquest that made the elder wolves lean forward in their chairs. She was, by every measure the pack world used, unremarkable. The pack world was wrong. For 3 full seasons, Catalina attended every grand pack ball, every hunt gathering, every solstice ceremony. She dressed with quiet care. She moved through torchlit halls that smelled of cedar and old power, and something wilder underneath, the scent of wolves who had never fully left the forest. She listened more than she spoke, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had always found that the most interesting things happened just beneath the noise, and she was very good at finding them. She also found, without meaning to, the one man in those halls she should never have let herself look at twice. Alpha King Vincent Nightfang, the most powerful alpha in 5 generations. A man carved from authority. Not cruel, not cold, but iron all the way through in a way that left no room for anything gentle. He stood at the head of every room he entered. He knew every ranked wolf by name, by bloodline, by ambition. He read power the way other men read weather, instinctively, accurately, without effort. He did not know Catalina Moonshadow existed. Not once, across 3 seasons of shared halls and shared firelight, did his eyes find hers. Not once did her presence register in the careful inventory his alpha senses kept. She was there. She was real. She was, in ways he would never know until it was almost too late, quietly protecting him. Redirecting dangerous conversations, smoothing over moments that could have cracked something important, offering her sharp, invisible care to a man who didn't know her name. And then, at the end of the 3rd season, she looked at herself clearly. She was a woman who had spent 3 years in rooms that were not built for her, quietly building her interior life around a man who would not have recognized her face in daylight. She was honest enough, always painfully honest, to understand what that meant, and she was strong enough to do something about it. She stopped going. No announcement, no dramatic farewell, no letter left on a pillar where he might find it. She simply stopped. The 4th season's invitations arrived on her writing table. She read each one. She set each one aside. And Alpha King Vincent Nightfang, the man who had never once noticed she was there, felt the shape of her absence on the very first night of the 4th season, before he even knew her name. The 3rd season ended on a night in late autumn, when the great hall smelled of pine smoke and old wine, and the quiet pride of a pack that had survived another year intact. The drums played low, the candles burned to stubs, and Catalina Moonshadow walked home through the cold night air with her cloak pulled tight and her thoughts arranged neatly, the way she arranged everything. She sat down at her writing table before she took her shoes off. The candle she lit threw long shadows across the room, across the shelves of dried herbs and worn books, across the small clay dishes her mother had left her, across the single window that looked out on a birch grove, gone silver and bare in the autumn cold. It was a good room, a room that had always felt entirely hers. She sat very still and thought about the evening, not with longing, not with the soft, foolish ache she had been carefully avoiding for 2 full seasons now. She thought the way she always thought when something needed to be examined, clearly. Without flinching, the way a healer examines a wound not to make it hurt less, but to understand what it will take to close. 3 seasons, she thought. 3 seasons of arriving exactly on time and standing in exactly the right place, and being exactly as present as anyone could ask for. 3 seasons of watching a man from across a hall and learning the exact angle of his shoulders when he was bored, and the exact stillness of his face when he was covering something. 3 seasons of being, in every sense that the pack world counted, entirely absent. Her wolf was quiet inside her. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something tiring. She reached out and touched the edge of the empty space on her table where the 4th season's invitation would eventually sit. She did not touch it for long. She simply noted where it would be. Then she stood up, hung her cloak, and went to bed. She did not cry. Catalina Moonshadow was not a woman who wept over things she understood clearly. She simply named them, filed them, and decided what to do about them. Crying was for things that surprised her, and this had stopped being a surprise at least a season ago. Her aunt, Genevieve Moonshadow, arrived the next morning with warm bread, and a look that said she had already drawn her own conclusions. Genevieve was 61 years old and had attended every pack ball for the last 40 of those years. She was small and bright-eyed and possessed of the particular kind of intelligence that sits very quietly in a corner and sees everything. She and Catalina had always understood each other in the way that certain women do, without needing to explain themselves, without needing to fill silence with sound. She set the bread on the table. She sat down. She looked at her niece's face. "You look like a woman who has made a decision," she said. Not a question. Catalina poured 2 cups of tea and did not immediately answer. Then she said, "I look like a woman who has not slept enough. Those are different things." Genevieve accepted the tea. She took a slow sip. She watched her niece the way she had been watching her for 3 years, with care and with the patience to let things arrive in their own time. "You always come home from the 3rd season Saul early," she said eventually. "Earlier each year." Catalina looked up. "I leave when I'm finished." "Yes," said Genevieve. "I noticed." There was a moment between them. The kind of moment that requires no words to carry its full meaning. Genevieve reached out and covered her niece's hand with her own for exactly 3 seconds. Then she took a piece of bread and did not say anything more about it. And Catalina, who had spent 3 years performing calm so well that even she sometimes forgot it was a performance, felt something in her chest ease. Just slightly, just enough to breathe around, because someone, at least, had looked close enough to notice. Market day came 2 mornings later, and Catalina walked through the pack village in the thin, bright cold of early winter, a basket over one arm and her mind on nothing in particular. The pack village was a living map of its own hierarchy. It always had been. You could read the social order in the way wolves stood and moved and acknowledged each other. Who stepped aside for whom, who called out in greeting, and who gave a nod, who laughed freely, and who laughed with one eye on the room. Catalina had been reading that map for so long that she did not have to think about it anymore. She simply moved through it, like water moving through known stone. She passed Scarlet Stormfang and Valentina Ashfang near the spice stalls, both of them bright and loud, and trailing the easy confidence of high-ranked she-wolves, who had never once doubted that any room they entered would rearrange itself to include them. They were laughing about something. Something to do with the 4th season's opening ball, which dresses had already been commissioned, which wolves had been seen together at the last elder dinner. They saw Catalina, they nodded. They kept talking. She nodded back. She kept walking. She passed Cassian Ironclaw the Alpha's Beta, lean and careful-eyed, on the steps of the council hall. He was reviewing patrol assignments. He looked up when she passed. He gave the kind of nod that meant recognized, not specifically remembered. She returned it. They had exchanged perhaps 50 words across 3 years. This was, for her rank and his, considered reasonable. She stopped at the edge of the market square where the buildings fell away, and you could see the great hall sitting at the end of the long path. Dark between seasons, its torches unlit, its stones grey and ancient and enormously patient, the way stones were. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned and walked home. This is the memory she came back to. Not often, but always honestly. It had been the Nightfang Autumn Hunt Gathering, 3rd season. The celebration fire had been burning hot and high, and the pack had been in full voice, laughing and competing and doing all the things packs do when they feel safe and strong and together. Catalina had stood at the edge of the firelight for 2 hours, watching, and had eventually stepped away into the dark because she had needed the quiet. She had walked without purpose, following the tree-lined path she knew led to the cliffside overlook, a stone ledge that jutted out over the valley below, the kind of place that felt like the edge of the world on clear nights. He was already there. She stopped. She went very still, in the way of a wolf who knows that the wrong movement will change something that should not be changed. Vincent Nightfang stood at the stone edge, with his hands loose at his sides, and his face turned toward the dark valley below. Not the face he wore in the great hall. Not the face that received challenges and greeted elders and managed the 1,000 small acts of authority that made up an Alpha's day. Just a face, just a man, tired in a way that sleep does not fix, carrying something in his expression that she had no right to name but recognized immediately. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been the answer to every question in a room for so long that they have forgotten they were ever allowed to have questions of their own. She counted without meaning to. 38 seconds. 38 seconds of standing in the dark, close enough to speak, watching the most powerful Alpha in 5 generations be, for once, simply himself. She had felt the words forming, not romantic words, just human ones. Are you all right? When did you last put it down, even for a moment? She said nothing. She turned and walked back into the firelight. Not because she was afraid, not because she lacked the courage, but because she understood, with the clean, clear honesty that defined her, that she was not a woman whose presence would have been welcome in that moment. Not because he was unkind, but because he did not know she existed. And a woman who knows she does not exist in someone's world should not be the one to interrupt his most private moment in it. She had kept that memory like a stone in a pocket. Not sharp enough to cut, just real, just heavy, just present. The 4th season's invitations arrived on a Tuesday in a neat stack sealed with the pack crest in dark wax. Catalina set them on the corner of her writing table. She looked at them for a long time. Then she opened the first one, the Blood Moon Solstice Ball, the grandest event of the season, held at the Great Hall at the end of the 1st month. She read the embossed lettering. She set it aside. The Ashfang Spring Gathering. She read it. She set it aside. The Grand Pack opening night. The first event of the 4th season. The one that set the tone for everything that followed. The one that every wolf of any rank attended, unless they were genuinely, provably unable to. She read it. She set it aside. She sat with the empty table in front of her and her own hands folded in her lap, and she was honest with herself in a way that required no ceremony. 3 seasons, 3 years of showing up. 3 years of moving through rooms that had never reorganized themselves to include her. 3 years of watching a man from across a hall and knowing, with the precision of someone who was very good at knowing things, that she was building something interior and important around an absence, around a man who would not have known her face in daylight. She was not a woman who spent herself on things that could not receive her. That was the whole thought. That was all of it. She did not send regrets to any of the invitations. She simply did not reply. In the pack world, that was unusual. It would be noticed, eventually, by the right wolves. She turned back to the book she had been reading. Her wolf inside her exhaled, long and slow, like something finally set down after a very long walk. The Grand Pack Ball opening night arrived with a cold and cloudless sky, and the distant sound of drums beginning their slow, deep welcome from the direction of the great hall. Catalina sat by her fire, with a book open in her lap and a cup of tea going warm on the small table beside her. She had lit 2 candles, the birch logs burned steady and quiet. The cat, a grey one whose name she had never officially assigned, but who answered to nothing anyway, was curled in the corner of the old chair, generating its small, private heat. Outside, the drums went on. She could hear them faintly through the stone walls. She could imagine the great hall filling up. The rush of cold air when the main doors opened, the smell of cedar smoke and pine, the torchlight playing across gowns and ceremonial sashes, and the careful, performative joy of wolves who understood that this particular evening required them to be seen. She turned a page. The drums swelled briefly. That meant the Alpha had entered. The room would be rearranging itself around him now, each wolf finding the precise angle of acknowledgement that their rank required. She turned another page. She was not sad. She needed to be clear about that. Needed to examine it with the same honesty she brought to everything else. She was not sitting by her fire with a hole in her chest, where an evening should have been. She was sitting by her fire in a room that was entirely hers, with a book she was genuinely interested in, on a night that was, for the first time in 3 seasons, asking nothing of her. She felt, with quiet surprise, something that might have been peace. The drums faded into the background of the night. She turned another page. The cat shifted in its chair, the candles burned low and steady, and in the great hall across the village, an Alpha King stood at the head of a room full of wolves, and felt, for the first time in his life, like something was missing, though he could not have told you what it was. Vincent Nightfang arrived at 89. He always arrived at 89. Not early, that was eagerness. Not late, that was disrespect. Precisely on time, because precision was itself a kind of power, and he had been exercising it long enough that it had become instinct. The great hall received him the way it always did. A ripple of awareness moving outward from the moment he appeared in the doorway. Every ranked wolf in the room recalibrating their position and their expression, without quite knowing they were doing it. That was what Alpha presence felt like when it was genuinely dominant and not merely performed. Not a demand for attention, but a gravitational fact. You didn't look at Vincent Nightfang because you were supposed to. You looked because the room tilted slightly toward him. He moved through it all, with the efficiency he had spent 20 years perfecting. Cassian fell into step beside him within seconds. Beta's habit, Beta's duty. All senior-ranked wolves accounted for, Cassian said quietly. Elder Vivienne arrived early. The Silverclaw delegation is at the east table. No challenges expected tonight. Vincent nodded. He scanned the room once. His Alpha's inventory, automatic as breathing. Threat, none. Hierarchy, intact. Notable absences, none. He scanned the room again, slower this time. Something nudged at the edges of his awareness. Not a threat exactly. Not the clean, cold clarity of a challenge incoming. Something softer than that. Something that felt less like danger and more like an equation that hadn't quite resolved. He found everyone he expected to find. He could not account for why the room felt slightly incomplete. He filed it. He moved on. He greeted Elder Vivienne with the particular warmth he reserved for wolves who had served the pack long enough to deserve it, and the evening proceeded as evenings in the great hall always proceeded. Correctly, efficiently, and at no point simply his own. Seraphina Silverclaw had served Vincent as senior advisor for 8 years, and she had learned, across those 8 years, that the most important things he communicated were the things he did not say. She stood near the east pillar, her usual position at these events, which gave her a clean sightline to both the Alpha and the room, and watched him move through the opening ceremony with her usual careful attention. He was correct tonight. He was always correct. He greeted the right wolves in the right order, with the right degree of warmth. He navigated the small political currents of the room. Who was sitting near whom? Who had arrived together? Who was avoiding whose eye? With the instinctive precision of a man who had read pack dynamics since childhood. He was perfect at this, and yet, twice now, Serafina had watched him scan the room with a quality of attention she had not seen before. Not the Alpha's inventory. She knew that scan. She had catalogued it across dozens of events. This was different. This had a quality of searching, of looking for something specific enough to have a shape, but unclear enough that he couldn't name it. He had done it once near the start of the evening. He had done it again 20 minutes later, near the fireplace at the hall's western end. Standing in almost the same position he always stood in at the end of these events. Except it was not the end of the evening. And he had no reason to be there yet. He is looking for something, Serafina thought. And he does not know what it is. That was interesting. Serafina found very few things genuinely interesting. She filed it the way she filed everything worth keeping. Precisely, without embroidery, for the moment it became relevant. The evening proceeded. Vincent stayed 43 minutes longer than he had stayed at any opening night in the 3 years she had known him. She said nothing, she watched. He rode home through the cold dark in the pack carriage, and the valley road was quiet and long. And somewhere between the great hall and the eastern wood he found himself thinking about, a night he had not thought about in a full year. The autumn hunt gathering, 3rd season. He had stepped away from the celebration, away from the fire and the noise and the wolves who needed things from him, and stood at the cliffside, overlook in the dark, alone, looking at the valley below and feeling, with the particular honesty that solitude allows, the full weight of everything he was responsible for. He was 29 years old. He had been Alpha King since 24. In those 5 years, he had not, to the best of his recollection, spent more than 4 consecutive hours simply being a man rather than a function. He had stood at the cliff edge, and he had looked at the valley, and he had thought nothing in particular, which was itself a luxury so rare that the absence of thought felt like something to be careful with, the way you are careful with the first warmth of a fire in a room that has been very cold. And then he had sensed something behind him, a presence, quiet, warm, steady, not threatening. His wolf had not moved, had not even shifted to attention. Whatever was behind him had simply been there, in the easy way that known things are present, the way someone comfortable in the same space as you is present. Not intruding, just there. He had turned around. There was no one there. He had told himself it was the wind. He had believed it mostly. He had not thought about it again, until tonight. Until 43 minutes of searching a room, he knew completely, and still finding it somehow short of what it was supposed to be. The carriage moved through the dark. He looked out the window at the tree line, silver-edged under the quarter moon. His wolf was alert in a way it had no rational cause to be. He let it settle. He went home. He told himself he was simply tired. The morning after the opening night, Cassian came with patrol maps and a carefully neutral expression that Vincent had learned, across years of working together, was the expression Cassian wore when he had something to say that he expected to be poorly received. They sat across from each other at the long table in the war room, a room not used for war now, mostly, but for the kind of ongoing maintenance that holding a pack together required. Maps, supply reports, territorial agreements, the careful ongoing arithmetic of governance. Cassian waited until the maps had been reviewed. Then he said, with the particular directness that was his best quality, "The Elder Council has asked again, about succession." Vincent set down the report he was holding. He picked up his tea. He did not say anything. 3 of the senior elders have raised it formally this time, Cassian continued. The pack is stable. The territory is strong. They're saying this is precisely when the Alpha should be thinking about a mate and an heir. That strength is the time to build, not to wait. I am aware of the argument, Vincent said. I know you are. A silence. The maps lay between them, with all their clean, practical lines. There will be time for it, Vincent said, which was what he always said. And then, which was not what he always said. Has anything changed in the pack since the last gathering? In terms of attendance patterns? Cassian looked up. The question was unusual enough that it registered. Nothing notable. A few minor wolves sent regrets for the opening. Standard for early season. Vincent nodded. He returned to the report. He did not ask a follow-up question, but Cassian, who had served him for 6 years, and who missed very little, went back to his own work with the quiet, private note that something had shifted in his Alpha overnight. He could not have said what. But he had been doing this long enough to trust the feeling. There is a particular kind of loyalty that does not ask for recognition. It does not arrive at the door with its name announced. It does not stand in the light and wait to be seen for what it is. It moves through the shadows of events, small and steady and invisible, and it holds things together in ways that only become apparent when it stops. Catalina Moonshadow had been practicing that kind of loyalty for 3 years, and she had never told a single living soul about it. The first time, it had been almost an accident. Second season, an elder dinner at the Silverclaw estate. She had been placed, as was usual for her rank, at the far end of the seating arrangement. The end where the conversation was less pointed, and the wine was refilled less often. She had not minded. She was there as a courtesy, an acknowledgement of her family name, if not her standing, and she had been quietly listening to the conversations around her the way she always listened, without signaling her attention, without giving any indication that she was gathering anything. And then she had heard it. Aldrich Grimwolf. Senior Wolf, old bloodline, the kind of man who knew the value of a whisper delivered to the right ears at the right time, had leaned across the table and said quietly to his neighbor that he had heard certain things about Vincent Nightfang's bloodline claim, certain questions that the Elder Council had never fully resolved. Questions, Aldrich said, that perhaps ought to be revisited now that the Alpha's position had fully consolidated. Questions that would be very interesting to the Eastern packs. It was the kind of comment designed to seem like nothing, casual, speculative, the kind that lodges in the mind and grows in the dark. Catalina had set down her wine. She had turned to the wolf on her left, a cheerful, well-connected she-wolf named Rosalind Frostfang, and said something funny about the eldest Ironclaw daughter's new mate, something that was accurate and kind and just sharp enough to catch. Rosalind had laughed. The wolf beside Rosalind had leaned in. The conversation had shifted, warm and loud, in the way of conversations that find a better current. Aldrich Grimwolf had looked up, noticed the shift, and found his opening gone. He would try again, eventually. Catalina knew that. But not tonight, and not in this room, and not with these particular seeds planted in these particular ears. Vincent had not been in the room for that dinner. He had never known. He would never know. Pack Hunt Gathering, first season. The ceremonial torchlighting was one of those rituals that mattered more than it should have. And everyone in attendance knew it. The elder wolves treated it with gravity. The Alpha's ceremonial torch was the last lit and the most visible, and if it went out during the ritual, for any reason, even a gust of wind, even bad oil, it was considered an omen. Not everyone believed in omens. But enough wolves did that. An unlit torch would have cast a shadow over the evening that even Vincent's authority might have struggled to manage. Catalina had noticed the problem before anyone else did. She was standing 3 rows back from the ceremonial circle, in the easy middle distance where her presence was expected but not noted, when she saw the torch keeper, a young male wolf, nervous, still learning the role. reach for the oil flask, and find it nearly empty. The expression on his face had been one she recognized. The specific panic of someone who has just understood that they have made a mistake in a visible moment. He had not looked around for help. He had not known who to look at. She had caught his eye. A single look, clean, direct, specific. Her gaze had moved from his face to the reserve supplies at the edge of the ceremonial circle, 10 feet away, and perfectly accessible if he moved now, before the procession reached him. She had raised one eyebrow. He had understood. He had moved. He had refilled the flask. He had been back in his position before the procession arrived. Vincent's torch had lit on the first strike. The elder wolves had nodded with satisfaction. The evening had proceeded without shadow. The torch-keeper had glanced at her afterward, with something on his face that was gratitude mixed with relief. She had nodded. Nothing more than that. Blood Moon Solstice Ball. Second season. This was the one that had stayed with her the longest. Perhaps because it was the one that had come closest to something she could not take back. She had been near the great fireplace at the hall's western end. Not because she had sought it out, but because the room was crowded and the fire was warm, and she had found an unoccupied corner of wall to occupy for a few quiet minutes. She had been watching, as she always watched, the way the room moved and breathed and managed itself. A group of young, ranked wolves, mid-level, ambitious, the kind whose status was still tender enough to need propping up with carefully chosen commentary, had gathered not far from where she stood. They were talking about Vincent, the usual topics, his refusal to choose a mate, his isolation, the way he kept the inner circle so small that even senior wolves rarely got close. And then one of them, young, sharp-tongued, a little drunk on courage, had said it. Said that the alpha delayed choosing a mate not because he was being careful, but because he was not, perhaps, the kind of wolf a she-wolf of standing would actually want. Said it with the particular cruelty that sits inside a compliment until the right moment to come out. It was the kind of comment that spreads. She knew exactly how it spread, not because anyone repeated it, but because it planted itself in the listener's own doubt. It would live in the room long after that young wolf sobered up and forgot he had said it. Catalina had set down her cup and turned toward the group. She had not confronted. She did not confront. She had simply entered the conversation at a right angle, the way you enter a current. Not against it, but across it, so that the direction changes without anyone noticing the redirection. She had said 3 things: specific, grounded, delivered with the easy certainty of someone who had simply been paying attention. The kind of things that made the comment already irrelevant before anyone had time to decide whether to agree with it. The young wolf had laughed at himself without knowing it and agreed with her. The group had moved on to something else. Vincent had been across the room. He had not heard a word. She had picked her cup back up and returned to the fire. She had stayed another 20 minutes. Then she had gone home. She had never asked herself why she kept doing it. She had known why. And knowing why had been, by the 3rd season, precisely the problem. Genevieve came back a second time, 2 weeks after the opening night, on a grey afternoon when the cold had settled in earnest, and the birch grove was deep in frost. She did not bring bread this time. She brought herself, which was more than enough. She sat across from Catalina at the writing table and looked at the neat stack of unopened, unanswered invitations without commenting on them directly. Then she said quietly, "People are noticing." Catalina looked up from the letter she was writing. "Let them. Vivienne Redmoon asked me yesterday whether you were well. She mentioned it with some care. I am perfectly well. You can tell her that." Genevieve watched her niece for a long moment. There was something behind her eyes, not worry, exactly. Something more considered than worry. The look of someone assembling pieces into a shape. "You spent 3 years in those halls," she said eventually. "You didn't do that for duty." Catalina set her pen down. She looked at her aunt. She said nothing. "I am not asking you to explain," Genevieve said. "I am only saying, I know it cost you something to walk away from it, and I know you well enough to know you walked away because staying was beginning to cost more. The room was very quiet. Catalina looked at her own hands on the table. She thought about a cliffside in the dark. 38 seconds. A presence in a doorway that no one had ever known about. 3 years of small invisible things offered to a man who would not have known her name. Yes, she said. Something like that. Genevieve nodded once. She rose and put her coat on. At the door she turned back. The thing about choosing to be seen, she said, is that the right person would have looked. She left. Catalina sat with that for a very long time. The second gathering of the 4th season was the Ashfang Winter Ceremonial. Less formal than the opening night, smaller, older in its ritual, the Great Hall was replaced with the Ashfang Territory Lodge, which seated perhaps half as many wolves and held them closer together. It was, by design, the kind of event where things that had been carefully managed at the opening night had room to surface. Vincent stood near the lodge fire with Cassian and listened to the territorial update from the Western Boundary Wardens and found himself at the end of a perfectly adequate report, with his attention elsewhere. The fire circle at the center of the lodge, the old ring of stones where the senior wolves gathered for the ceremonial portion of the evening, had an arrangement that remained consistent across seasons. Families sat together, ranks clustered naturally. The east side of the circle had, over years, developed its own informal geography. Specific wolves returned to specific places, not because anyone assigned them, but because habit, in pack gatherings, was its own kind of order. There was an empty place on the east side, not a gap. The wolves around it had adjusted naturally, the way water adjusts around a stone. But empty in the sense that the spacing was slightly wrong, the way a room is slightly wrong after furniture has been moved. He noticed it the way you notice something that does not rise to the level of a concern. Filed it, returned to Cassian's report. Then, perhaps 20 minutes later, Rosalind Frostfang, cheerful, socially precise, a wolf who tracked attendance at these gatherings the way others tracked weather, said to no one in particular, "One of the usual faces near the east pillar is absent again this season. That quiet one, Moonshadow, is it? I do hope she is well." Cassian said something neutral in response. The conversation moved on. Vincent said nothing. He returned to his tea and the territorial report and the ongoing management of an evening that required his attention. But somewhere in the deeper part of his instinct, the part that was wolf before it was alpha, the part that registered things before his mind had caught up to them, something had shifted, the way a lock shifts when the right key turns. He did not examine it yet. He simply held it, without quite knowing he was holding anything. Serafina had learned, in 8 years of serving an alpha, whose instincts were among the sharpest she had encountered, not to act on anything until she understood what she was acting on. She understood enough now to begin. The following morning, she sat in her study with a cup of tea and the meticulous mental record she kept of every social event she had attended in the last 3 seasons. Not written, because writing creates evidence, but held the way Serafina held everything important. In a memory palace so orderly and detailed that she could walk its corridors at will and find anything she had placed there. She walked it now. Catalina Moonshadow, Omega, Moonshadow Bloodline, Minor, present at every major gathering across 3 seasons. Every ball, every ceremony, every hunt gathering. Never in the inner circle. Always near the east pillar of the Great Hall, or its equivalent in smaller venues. Quiet. Observant. Not ambitious in any legible way. Never introduced to the Alpha. Never acknowledged by the Alpha's circle. Never sought, and now absent, all season. Every invitation, apparently, declined or unanswered. Serafina was not a romantic. She did not construct love stories in her head and then look for evidence to support them. She constructed questions, and then she looked for answers. The question she was constructing now was, Why does the Alpha scan a room twice in a searching way, stay 43 minutes longer than he has ever stayed, and go still when a name is mentioned? A name belonging to a wolf he has never, to anyone's knowledge, interacted with. There were several possible answers. Serafina set down her tea and considered which one was most likely to be true. Scene 3. Vincent asks a question, should not have to ask. 3 days after the Ashfang ceremonial, Vincent called Serafina into the war room under the pretense of reviewing the spring patrol rotations. They reviewed them. He was thorough and precise, as he always was. Then, at the end, he said, in the same tone he had used for the patrol reports, "Moonshadow. The family, who are they?" Serafina looked at him. She had a very good face for moments like this. A face that gave nothing while receiving everything. She had cultivated it for 20 years, and she had rarely needed it as much as she needed it right now. Minor bloodline, she said, old, western edge of pack territory. A small family, mostly healers and record keepers. The matriarch is Genevieve Moonshadow. You may know her name from the elder correspondence. Her niece has attended pack gatherings for the last 3 seasons. Catalina, Vincent said. Serafina had thought she was prepared for this. She found that she was not entirely. Yes, Catalina Moonshadow, Omega rank, not a prominent figure in pack social life. Vincent looked at the patrol map. He was quiet for a moment that stretched past its natural length. She isn't attending this season. No, it appears not. Why, it was not a question. It was the kind of statement that is technically a question, but carries the weight of an alpha, who has decided that an answer will be produced. I don't know, Serafina said, which was honest. Then, would you like me to find out? Another pause. He returned to the patrol map. He said, not formally, no. She nodded. She gathered her papers. At the door she paused, because there was one more thing to say, and because she had served him long enough to know when something needed to be said. She was at every gathering for 3 years, Serafina said. Every single one, near the East Pillar. She left before he could respond. He sat in the empty war room and looked at the patrol map for a long time without seeing it. Midwinter came in hard that year. The birch grove went from frost to ice in 2 days, and the wolf village settled into the particular quiet of a pack that has decided, collectively, to wait. Catalina spent those weeks exactly as she had always spent them. Her days full, her mind engaged, her evenings quiet in a way that had gone from hollow to genuinely, startlingly good. She had a pile of mending for the pack healer, a correspondence with a record keeper, 3 territories east, who had questions about historical pack boundaries that she had found she enjoyed answering. A new book from Genevieve that she had been reading slowly, in the particular way of someone savoring a thing rather than consuming it. She had not thought about the Great Hall in 2 weeks. She noted this with satisfaction. The way you note the healing of something that had been quietly aching for a long time. The knock at her door came on a Tuesday evening. She opened it, expecting the healer's messenger, or perhaps Genevieve, with no warning, as was her occasional habit. Serafina Silverclaw stood on her doorstep. Catalina looked at her. She said nothing, because there was nothing appropriate to say until she understood what this was. Serafina said, "May I come in?" Catalina stepped back. She closed the door behind them. She did not offer tea, because this was not a social call, and pretending it was would have been beneath both of them. "I am not here officially," Serafina said. "I understand. I am here because I am trying to understand something, and I think you may be the only person who can help me understand it." Catalina waited. "The Alpha has been different," Serafina said. "Since the 4th season began, since the opening night, I have served him for 8 years. I know the specific quality of his attention when something is genuinely wrong, and I know the quality of it when something else is happening. This is something else. You're telling me this because the something else began the night of the opening ball. The first event you did not attend. The room was very quiet. Catalina stood very still, in the way she had stood very still on a cliffside once, 38 seconds in the dark. I see, she said. I don't think you do, Serafina said. Not fully. He asked me who the Moonshadow family is. He knew your name before I said it. He has attended 4 more events since the opening, and at every one he stays later than he should, and comes home without whatever he was looking for. Catalina sat down. She did it slowly, the way of someone who has just received information that needs time to settle. She looked at her hands. She thought about 3 years. She thought about invitations sitting on a corner of a table. She thought about a woman who had made a decision with clean and honest reasons, and who had not, until this moment, considered whether the decision had consequences she hadn't accounted for. "What do you want me to do with this?" she said. "Nothing yet," said Serafina. "I only wanted you to know." After Serafina left, Catalina sat by the fire for a long time. She was not a woman who arrived at feelings casually or in pieces. She arrived at them whole, and she arrived at them honestly, which meant she could not pretend this one was simpler than it was. He had noticed she was gone. He had noticed she was gone. 3 years of invisibility, and now, in the absence of her presence, something in him had registered what her presence had been. The absurdity of it was specific and clean, not the soft, romanticized absurdity of stories, but the actual, functional absurdity of. He could not find what he had never looked for. He was missing something he had never known he had. And she had made a decision she was proud of. She had made it with good reasons and clear eyes, and the self-respect of a woman who had finally stopped spending herself where the return was nothing. She looked at the fire. She was not angry. She thought about whether she should be, whether the correct response to this was a righteous fury at 3 wasted years, at the particular injustice of being seen only by absence. But fury would have required her to believe that he owed her something, and she had never believed that. You could not owe recognition to someone you did not know existed. It was not the debt she was angry about. It was simply the timing, the particular brutal timing. She got up. She put more wood on the fire. She made tea she did not particularly want, because having something to do with her hands was useful. She thought about what Genevieve had said. The thing about choosing to be seen. The right person would have looked. She thought about a cliffside. 38 seconds. The most private moment she had ever shared with someone who didn't know she was there. She drank her tea. She went to bed. She slept. In the morning, she had not made any decisions. But the shape of the problem was clearer. The 3rd event of the 4th season was a formal elder dinner at the Red Moon estate. Smaller than the ball, more significant in its way. Elder Vivienne Redmoon hosted these dinners twice a season, and they were the events where the real conversations happened, behind the ceremony of the larger gatherings. Attendance was by specific invitation. Vincent attended as a matter of duty and good sense. He sat between Cassian and the senior boundary warden, doing the thing he had always done at these dinners. Listening more than speaking, managing the careful social geometry of wolves who had opinions and the standing to act on them. He was mid-sentence with the boundary warden when he heard it. Vivienne Redmoon, from 3 seats away, in the easy conversational tone of someone who kept careful track of every wolf who passed through her gatherings. "I notice we are missing the Moonshadow girl again this season. One does hope she is well. Such a steady presence always. I rather miss seeing her near the east pillar." The boundary warden was still talking. Vincent heard him. He responded to what was required. He finished the sentence he had started. He did not react visibly in any way that anyone at that table would have noticed. Serafina, standing 12 feet away near the sideboard, noticed. She watched him go completely still. Not the stillness of discomfort, not the stillness of calculation, but the particular stillness of a wolf whose instincts have just confirmed something his conscious mind has been circling for weeks. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then he was back, measured, attentive, everything in order. But the stillness had been real, and Serafina had been watching. She filed it. She did not allow herself the luxury of a smile, but she thought, there it is. He brought it to Cassian 3 days after the Red Moon dinner, which was how Vincent managed things he did not entirely understand. He sat with them until they were clear enough to be spoken, and then he exposed them to the one person he trusted with unfinished thoughts. They were riding the western perimeter, a regular patrol check, part of the rhythm of keeping the pack's territory intact. The morning was cold and bright, and the horses moved at an easy pace through the tree-lined boundary path. Vincent said, without preamble, "What do you know about Catalina Moonshadow?" Cassian did not look surprised, which meant he had been expecting something like this. "Minor bloodline, as I said, Western Territory. The aunt, Genevieve, is known in elder circles. The niece attended pack gatherings consistently for 3 seasons. No notable incidents, no complaints, no record of any kind. She simply was there, and then she wasn't. And then she wasn't." The horses moved through a break in the trees. The valley opened below them, silver and still in the morning cold. "Has anyone spoken with her?" Vincent said. "Serafina visited," Cassian said, "last week, informally." "I know," another silence. "She's well?" Vincent said. "By all accounts." He nodded. He looked at the valley. He said nothing more for a while. Then, 3 seasons. I shared halls with her for 3 seasons. "Yes, and I don't know what she looks like." Cassian said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say to that. It was not a statement that required a response. It was an alpha acknowledging, out loud, something that needed to be acknowledged before he could move forward from it. Vincent turned his horse back toward the pack village. His voice was the same even tone he always used, but underneath it, if you were listening very carefully, and Cassian always was, there was something that had not been there before. Something that was, in a controlled and dignified way, doing the work of understanding that it had missed something important. It was Serafina who came to Genevieve, not the Alpha himself, and Genevieve thought that was actually to his credit. He had understood enough to know that arriving at Catalina's door without preamble would have been the wrong move, and so he had sent his advisor, which showed a care she had not expected from a man whose instincts, apparently, had been asleep for 3 years. Serafina sat across from her in the small warm parlor of the Moonshadow cottage and said, without great ceremony, "He wants to meet her." Genevieve poured tea. She took a long sip. She set the cup down with the particular calm of a woman who has been waiting for this exact conversation for longer than she would say. "Why?" she said. "Because he understands now that she was present across 3 seasons, and he never looked. And why does that matter to him?" Serafina considered this. She was honest, which Genevieve respected. "I don't know the full depth of it yet. What I know is that her absence has done something to his sense of the room." He described it to Cassian as incomplete. "The hall feels incomplete to him. He has been there 4 times this season, and each time he comes home earlier than the last, as if he stops looking for what isn't there." Genevieve was quiet for a moment. "She made a decision," she said. "A good one. She made it for good reasons. I won't ask her to undo it simply because the man who never looked has now realized he was not looking." "No one is asking her to undo anything," Serafina said. "He is not asking for her forgiveness or her presence at any particular event. He is asking through me, through you, whether she would be willing to simply meet once, on her terms." Genevieve looked at her. "On her terms," she repeated, "completely." Genevieve sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at Serafina with the particular expression of a woman who has made her own calculation. "I will ask her," she said. "That's all I will do, ask." Genevieve came on a grey Thursday afternoon and knocked in the particular way she always has knocked. Twice, then once, and Catalina opened the door and looked at her aunt's face and understood immediately that this was not an ordinary visit. She stepped back. She put the kettle on. She waited. Genevieve told her, simply and plainly, what had been asked. She did not dramatize it. She did not lean on it. She laid it out the way she laid everything out. as information that belonged to Catalina, to do with as Catalina chose. Catalina stood at the window and looked at the frost-edged birch grove and was quiet for a long time. "On my terms," she said. "That is what was said. He means it. Serafina means it. And she does not say things she does not mean." The kettle began to warm. The frost on the window made small abstract shapes at the edges of the glass. Catalina thought about 3 seasons in the great hall. She thought about a cliffside and 38 seconds, and the words she had chosen not to say. She thought about the decision she had made at her writing table, the clean, self-respecting decision, and whether the thing she was being asked now was a contradiction of that decision, or simply the next part of it. She had not stopped going because she wanted to be missed. She had stopped because staying was costing her something she couldn't afford. Those were different things. She had stopped going because staying was costing her something she couldn't afford. Those were different things. The question in front of her now was not, "Has he earned this?" That was the wrong question. The question was, "Do I want to meet the man I spent 3 years in halls with?" Now that he has finally, slowly, started to understand what he missed, do I want to find out, with my eyes open this time, whether there is anything there worth meeting? She turned away from the window. "Tell Serafina yes," she said, "but I choose where and when, and it's not in the Great Hall." She chose the library, not the Pack Hall Library, which was public and formal and smelled of ceremony. Her own. The small, stone-walled room at the back of the Moonshadow Cottage that held 3 generations of family records and an old reading chair by the window and the kind of quiet that had always made Catalina think clearly. She chose a mid-morning in the 3rd week of the month, when the light came in flat and grey and honest. She set out 2 cups. She sat in her usual chair. She did not arrange herself for effect, because she was not a woman who arranged herself for effect. He arrived on time, exactly. He came alone, which she had not specified but had hoped for. He was not in ceremonial dress. He wore what a man wore when he had decided to come as himself, not as a function. She stood when he came in, not as deference. She looked at him directly, no performance in it. But because it was polite, and she was always polite, he looked at her face for the first time. She let him. She watched him do it. She watched the particular process of recognition, not of a known face, but of something more structural than that. The recognition of a presence that your instincts know before your mind catches up. He said, "You're not what I expected," she said. "You didn't expect anything. You didn't know I existed." It was not cruelty. It was the kind of accuracy that she had always preferred to social smoothness. She said it, and held his gaze and waited to see what he would do with it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down, in the second chair, the one she had placed across from hers, and he said, "No, you're right, I didn't, and I'm here to understand why that is." She sat down. She handed him the second cup. She said, "That's a good place to start." They talked for 2 hours. Not the managed, careful conversation of a formal meeting. Not the performative back and forth of wolves establishing hierarchy. Simply 2 people, talking honestly, in a room that was not the Great Hall, and that owed nothing to rank or ceremony, or who either of them was supposed to be in the world's accounting. He told her about the opening night, the room scan, the feeling of something incomplete that had no name. He told her about the cliffside, his version of it, the sensation of a presence behind him, the feeling, brief and structural, of not being alone. He said he had told himself it was the wind. She said very quietly, "It wasn't." He looked at her. She told him, 38 seconds. The words she had chosen not to say, the decision she had made, to leave, to not interrupt, and why she had made it. He was silent for a long time after that. "You saw me," he said. "Yes, and you walked away. You didn't know I was there." That was the answer to everything I needed to know about the situation. Another silence, longer. The kind of silence that has a quality of something settling, of weight redistributing, of a man sitting with a truth about himself that is not comfortable and choosing, regardless, not to look away from it. 3 seasons, he said. 3 seasons, she agreed. I missed it. All of it. She looked at him. She thought about everything she had done. The dinner at the Silverclaw estate, the torch, the young wolf at the solstice ball. And she thought about whether she would tell him any of it now, or whether that was something for another conversation. Or no conversation at all, she decided. Not today. Today was for honesty, not catalogue. Today was for the shape of the problem, not every detail inside it. You missed it, she said. Yes, he accepted that. He didn't argue it, didn't minimize it, didn't reach for the particular defensive maneuver of men who have been told they failed to see something. The maneuver where the failure becomes about the world's unfairness rather than their own attention. He simply sat with it. She respected that more than she had expected to. Why did you stop going? He asked. Not the easy version of the question, not the social version, the direct one. She considered it for a moment. She thought about her writing table, about the invitations in a neat stack, about the exhale of her wolf, long and slow, because I was spending myself in rooms that had no place for me, and that was no longer something I could afford. She said, I went because I wanted to, for the first season. For the second season, I told myself I went because I found it interesting. By the third season, I was honest enough with myself to know that wasn't the whole story. The whole story being a woman who built too much of her interior life around someone who didn't know her name. He was very still. I'm not angry about it, she said, because that seemed important to say clearly. I made a decision I was right to make. The problem was not that you didn't see me. The problem was that I was in rooms hoping to be seen when I had not been seen across 2 full seasons, and I had to be honest with myself about what that meant. What did it mean that I needed to stop? And now, she looked at him. The flat winter light came through the small window and fell between them with the kind of honesty that light in a real room always has. No ceremony, nothing adjusted. Now, she said, I am sitting in my own library, in my own chair, talking to a man who asked to meet me on my terms and kept that promise. That is different. He looked at her. She let him look. Serafina was at the estate when he returned. She had not waited for him. She was there for legitimate business, a territorial map review that had been scheduled for weeks. But she had timed her arrival with the awareness of someone who understood that the morning's meeting would have mattered. She did not ask him anything directly. She never did. She simply observed. He was different. Specifically, he was quieter in a way that was not closed but present. He sat with the maps, and he was genuinely attentive, and he moved through the meeting at the usual pace. But there was, underneath all of it, a quality she had not seen in him before. She spent some time trying to name it precisely, because she always tried to name things precisely. Eventually she arrived at restored. He looked like a man who had been given back. Something he had not known was missing. At the end of the meeting, she said, because there was no one else in the room, and because she had known him long enough. Was it useful? He looked up, he said, without any attempt to pretend he did not know what she meant. Yes, good. She's extraordinary. Serafina looked at the map. She kept her face precisely as it always was. I know, she said. I noticed. It took me somewhat less than 3 seasons. She said it without inflection. She gathered her papers. She left the room. She allowed herself in the hallway a single quiet smile. Then she put it away. She had work to do. He left exactly when he said he would leave. Not staying past the time she had offered. Not pressing for more than the meeting she had agreed to. He said, at the door, that he hoped she would be willing to speak again. He said it plainly. No performance. She said she would consider it. He nodded. He left. She stood in the doorways of her small stone library and watched him walk back down the path, through the frost-edged birch grove, and she thought, there is the man who was always at the head of those halls. There is the man I spent 38 seconds watching from the dark. He was not what she had built him into across 3 years of watching from a distance. He was less mythic and more real, more tired, more genuinely attentive, more capable of sitting with an uncomfortable truth than she had given him credit for. He was, in other words, a person, an actual person, which was both more difficult and more interesting than what she had imagined. She closed the door. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the frost patterns on the window. Her wolf inside her was very quiet. The good kind of quiet this time. The kind that meant paying attention. She reached for the book she had set aside when he arrived. She did not open it immediately. She sat with the morning and what it had been. 3 seasons of invisibility, 1 decision to leave, and a man who had needed the absence of a presence he had never acknowledged to understand what it was he had been missing. It was not, she thought, a love story yet. It was the beginning of the question that love stories are made of. Do you want to find out who this person is, fully, with your eyes open? Her answer, she discovered, was yes, not with urgency, not with the breathless certainty of women in stories who fall and fall without looking at the ground, but with the particular kind of yes that belongs to a woman who has been honest with herself for long enough to know the difference between what she wants and what she has simply been accustomed to wanting. She opened her book. She read 3 pages. She made a note in the margin about something that had struck her. Outside, the birch grove held its frost. The pack village went about its winter business. The great hall sat at the end of its long path, dark between seasons, its torches unlit, patient. And somewhere across the village, an Alpha King sat with his maps and his careful advisor, and the particular, revised understanding of a man who had learned, late at cost, but genuinely, that the things that hold the hall upright do not always announce themselves, that some presences are only understood in their absence, that the stone pillars bear the weight of the ceiling for years without being thanked, and the ceiling stands regardless, and that sometimes when the ceiling finally looks down, when it finally, after far too long, simply looks, it finds something it cannot believe it missed. Spring came slowly, the way spring always came to wolf territory. Grudgingly, in stages, the frost giving way to mud before it gave way to green. The 5th season's invitations arrived on Catalina's writing table on a morning in early spring. She opened them the same day they arrived, which was not something she had done the previous season. She read each one. She did not set them aside. She thought about the library and 2 hours, and a man who had sat with an uncomfortable truth without looking away from it. She thought about conversations they had continued. Not many, not rushed, on her terms as agreed, each one adding a layer to something that was being built carefully and without pretense. She thought about who she was, not who the pack world had failed to see, but who she actually was. A woman with a sharp mind and a steady heart and 38 seconds of a cliffside that belonged entirely to her. A woman who had chosen once to stop, and who was choosing, now, from a much better position. From full knowledge, from genuine strength, from the standing of someone who had never needed to be in those halls to be worth noticing, to walk back in, differently, not near the east pillar, not invisible, not performing patience while waiting for a man to look. Simply herself, in full, she wrote her acceptance for the opening ball. She wrote it in the firm, clear hand she used for everything that mattered. She sealed it and set it to be delivered. Then she stood at the small window of a cottage and looked out at the birch grove, which was beginning, finally, to show the first small green at the tips of its branches. Her wolf was quiet and warm and alive inside her. The 5th season had not started yet. She was already looking forward to it.